I don't think she can. Can you see us?
I can see Drew and I can hear you now.
Okay,
Oh.
good.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So before we get started, I am going to be sharing my screen later.
I'll just stop share, and then you should be able to share on your end once
Awesome.
that happens. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Discussion item.
she's muted. She might not have heard you. I don't know.
Sorry?
Oh, is that for the climate resilience discussion, Sarah?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's agenda item number 2.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So we're just waiting on Alex? Rich said he wasn't coming.
What's that?
Rich said he wasn't
Rich said he
coming.
wasn't
We didn't hear from Marjorie at all.
We haven't heard from Marshall.
I hope she's all right. She's having a
Not a
really
huge
tough go
turnout,
of it.
huh?
Yeah, what if we gave a party and nobody came? Well, Lynn's here. Well, I think we should just get started. We have a quorum.
So, yeah.
Might as well. Why
We
wait?
got 1 minute according to
Oh, I was looking at that clock up there. And I guess finance wasn't in the room again. This is waiting for that light to come on over there. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, or here it is. Okay, we all set?
Yep.
Great, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin the Mashpee Conservation Commission meeting. Tonight's meeting is a quarterly update review. This is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. We are meeting in the Wacoit Meeting Room, Mashpee Town Hall, 16 Great Neck Road North, broadcast live on local cable channels 8 and 1072. Also streamed live on the Town of Mashpee website. This is a hybrid remote meeting. So before we do begin, if you would like to join me in a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start with a moment of silence. Okay. First on our agenda is for any public comment for issues that are not related to agenda items for tonight's meeting. So if there is anyone from the public that wants to address us, guess not. Nobody online that wants to speak with us, we'll move along. Next on our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes for 12/12/24. Those minutes are not finished yet, so I'm going to table that to our next meeting. Hopefully Ben will have that and deal with it then. So moving along to discussion items. First on our list is Chapter 172, Regulation 25, discussion of Draft 7 that has been reviewed and returned by Town Council. So you should have received an email, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days ago. That was all sent out so that you could see, everything that was commented on. I think we got a pretty favorable review. There are some issues, obviously, that we want to talk about here tonight. So if you had the time to look through that, I guess the best thing to do, we'll just go right on through it page by page and take it comment by comment. That seemed to be the best.
Sure.
Okay. So what we have done, and we're trying to do this with all the regulations, is make some kind of a consistent format, a layout to them. So they start with a preamble and an introduction, and there seem to be no comments or issues with anything in that. On page 2 of what you have tonight on the table, those are the critical characteristics and presumptions of significance. The first couple of these, I think the first 3 or 4, are pretty much what we had in the existing Regulation 25. We may have made a few word changes here and there, but I think paragraph by paragraph, they're pretty similar, until you get down to the bottom. And that paragraph is completely different. It's actually added in to critical characteristics. And I know on paper you can't do this, but on the electronic file, a lot of these links are clickable, and you can go right over to the areas that are being mentioned, not only here, but also in the resource page at the end of the document. We've already taken a look at this Morris Data Viewer. I know Drew spent some time with a few of the workshops, as did I, and I think, Sarah, you may have spent some time with that as well, I'm not sure. But that was brought before us in the presentation from Coastal Zone Management. And it's quite a tool. It's very similar to the GIS program for the town of Mashpee with the different layers. And it projects out, as you know, into 2030, 2050, and 2070 for sea level rise. And I believe that you could look at some of those layers and start focusing on certain areas of town that, to me, would be a very good area to look at for coastal resiliency instead of a buffer zone for the floodplain. Because those low-lying areas, naturally, as sea level comes up and we get storm surges coming in, they're going to go under. So they, on a nice day, they look beautiful, but when the storms hit, they don't. So it might be a nice thing as we go down the road further to start looking at that viewer a little bit more often to see which areas are of interest.
The only thing I saw, Paul, on that is the heading on it, the word presumption, I think, is missed as a typo. The T and the P are swapped.
Yep. That's been haunting us since the beginning. We've been at that for 2 years. I think we corrected it on draft 2, and then it popped up in draft 4.
Change the word, it didn't highlight it.
Yeah.
Autocorrect.
You must have saved it at one time and spelled incorrectly.
Yes.
That spell check makes you a lazy person. Good catch, though. Okay.
Paul, I had a comment
Sure.
here as well.
Go ahead.
And I'm not sure if it made it in time. I know we got this and provided comments at the same time it got submitted to KP Law.
We
but
did send those in,
I-
yeah.
Yeah, one of the comments was just a suggested rephrase of that last paragraph, that highlighted paragraph. And I did make a couple of comments, and I went through the current version, and I don't think many of them were used, and that's okay, but they were all kind of variations on a theme, as we say, and thinking about the usability of this document to applicants and just community members, and making sure that it's not just a bunch of jargon on paper, but it's actually really usable. There's a lot of numbers, the way that paragraph is written, and I feel like it's a little confusing, and I actually located a different reference through the EPA, and I had sent the link in a comment, but really, instead of the sentence that starts, sea levels have risen about 9 inches during the 20th century, I had suggested taking out that and replacing it with another citation from the EPA that says Massachusetts experienced nearly 11 inches of sea level rise between 1921 and 2020. By 2100, the state could see 4 to 10 feet of sea level rise. Sea level rise will continue to increase coastal flooding and erosion along the Massachusetts coastline. Erosion threatens beaches, dunes, and wetlands. It also damages residences, historic structures, and roadways. Beach and wetland losses and resulting diminished protection of coasts are expected to have major economic costs. So it was just a summary of some really concise bullet points
Sure.
into what the numbers are and why it matters, instead of the kind of play-by-play of the ranges. So that was just
Okay.
a suggestion that I put forth.
Well, we can go back and take a look at
That would
that.
be great.
We have that you submitted that to us, and then we submitted it with the draft to legal counsel. So maybe he wasn't aware of the fact that,
Yeah, he didn't, legal counsel, I submitted, your comments, Sarah, Steve's,
Sure.
and I think Rich Saul submitted comments as well. I'm not sure if Alex did. But he didn't really comment on any of those comments, and in my submittal for legal advice, we have to submit an official request. I made it known that, please reference these documents with commissioner comments, the existing wording, and the proposed draft, collectively, and provide your feedback, but it doesn't seem like he provided feedback on the comments. I think he just focused on what we had here in the draft, so I can certainly go back, resubmit, and reemphasize, that if he has any opinions on the commissioner comments, or maybe he was just focused on the legality of the existing language and not getting into what should or shouldn't be added for emphasis or information. I think that's ultimately probably the commission's discretion
right.
collectively if that language wants to be added. I would imagine he probably just focused on the legal aspect of the draft
Sure.
language. Yeah.
And that was the idea, right, of having legal counsel review it. Is it
Correct,
legally enforceable? And I'm thinking of a totally different objective. So that makes all the sense in the world. I don't think any rewrites on that would impact the enforceability of it, but I would defer to the rest of the commission. I just did want to get it on the record, as there were,
Yep.
I read through them briefly today, but I saw that there were a number of things that just caught my eye as opportunities to really make sure that we're not creating kind of a barrier to anybody reading this and understanding what it says.
Sure, good point.
Can I
It-
just ask, so, I think what Sarah just laid out is pretty elegant and probably for a lay person, it's very understandable and, digestible. What I like about the way the language is written now is it pins to Massachusetts, right? Sarah, you talked, it does reference these Massachusetts, but it does, we kind of sit our guidelines and on top of the Massachusetts thing. Would it hit your needs, like what you just described? Could we fit it into the preamble at the beginning and still get, and leave both there?
We could, yeah. So, and I'm sorry you don't have it in front of you, Shauna, but the information from the EPA website is from a page and information in a report that's specific to Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So it does reference Massachusetts as
Okay.
well. It's just a federal citation rather than a state one.
And Sarah, just so I'm clear, when you're referring to this last paragraph here, under the
Yeah.
paragraph, this one right here that's highlighted in yellow?
Yep.
Is that the one you were referring to as far as?
Yes,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
that's the
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
All right, well, that's why we're going through this. We want to make sure that everybody's questions and comments are addressed, and whatever we have to add in or take out, that's what we're going to do. So I've got a notation on that, the EPA Massachusetts link from Sarah, and for that paragraph. And/or if it looks better in the preamble, I don't know. Well, we'll take a look at it, for sure. Then on page 3 of this handout are all of the definitions that some of which were in or are in the existing Regulation 25, but many of these are new. They've been added on, and that's gone through several iterations, and I think we've pretty much hit on everything. There were a few comments. When you get to coastal resiliency zone, legal counsel had commented this term should be defined, and what he's referring to is the coastal flood risk area. So Drew took a look at Cape Cod Commission's materials, and they have coastal flood risk area defined, and we are under the impression we'll put that in.
Yeah, it's just a basic definition taken right from the Cape Cod Commission, so we can add that to the definitions section. Council just felt it warranted more defining, so that's an easy fix. So we can just add that definition as you see highlighted on the screen underneath his first comment there, and that is taken word for word from the Cape Cod Commission website.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah,
Steve?
page before, under building and/or structure,
Yes.
don't count a deck. A deck is counted as a structure according to the building code and the town of Mashpee zoning bylaws. So it doesn't mention a deck. So I think we ought to add that in.
So you want deck in there as well?
Yeah, because it says
That
building
means
means any
any
structure has a roof
structure
and
that's a
wall,
roof and
especially
wall.
permanent structure. It can be structured as designed or intended for support. Well, yeah, a deck could be, but at least that's,
So we'll get some terminology to refer to a deck.
yeah, 'cause that's a structure. If you said,
It's a structure.
if you said building alone, it wouldn't be, I think, but when you
Right.
say structure.
Right, and/or
Yeah,
structure.
the bylaw considers a deck a structure.
Okay, so we need to get deck in there. Okay. Got it.
And Paul, while we're on the coastal resiliency zone, I think that was one of the comments I had too, just to, and I had added something in just to define what a coastal resiliency zone is before we talk about what it includes. So the definition I had put forth is that it's just a regulatory tool to assist in protecting critical resource areas adjacent to coastlines that will experience shifts and landward migration due to rising sea level and changes on coastlines due to human activity and natural ecological shifts.
Okay.
So again, if there's just somebody reading this who doesn't know what a coastal resiliency zone refers to, it might be helpful to just define what we're talking about before we introduce what it's going to include.
Right. I'm wondering if we could combine that with the definitions that Drew has added on here: coastal banks, dunes, beaches, barrier beaches, flat
Sure.
salt marsh, because those all do move along as the coastline moves along with it, right? So we could
Absolutely,
probably put
yeah.
those two together and keep it right in that same definition, although it's going to be a fairly long definition, but
Okay.
does that sound plausible to the rest of the commissioners?
Yeah.
I would think those two could be melded together, right? All right, so let me just add a quick note on this. CRC. And Sarah, you said that was on your list of comments to legal, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so we should be able to refer back to that and see those. All right. Good. Moving on down through the rest of these, there were no comments on them, but if you have comments,
Yeah, I have a couple on
Yes,
the
Steve.
minimal wave and moderate wave action.
okay, hold on.
So,
All right, I'm with you.
okay, so those two. So when you go back into this, the graphic here on this page right
On the
there.
resource page, right?
Right, so you go to this graphic right there. It
Yes.
says A-zone and coastal A-zone. I think we ought to put that in, because people look at it and go, MIWA, they don't know. Because when you look at site plans, they say A-zone, V-zone.
Right.
So maybe, so the MIWA should be an A zone and the MOA be coastal A to match
Right.
up, so then a layperson can read it and it matches up with site plans. Because a lot of times some of the site plans, they don't mention the MIWA or MOA on the
No, I
plans.
think we put those in because that was one of the suggestions from the Papaneset group, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they,
And the definitions came from the CZM.
right.
But I think if you just match up with this graphic.
So everybody's clear on what A zones we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yep.
And coastal A zone,
Okay.
that's all. Yeah, just,
So we'll put coastal with MOA, obviously, and the other A zones would go into MIWA. Okay. And, hold on a second. Do we have, I'm just going back to see. No, we don't. I know, I have in my bookmarks, I have the FEMA hazard layer GIS program that you can pull up and punch in any address you want, and it comes right up, whether it's, MIWA or MOA, which is kind of nice. Maybe we could stick that on the resource list as well. Let me just,
Minimal wave action zone, Steve, and for everybody, is that also considered the AE zone?
yes,
So I'm just gonna put that in there.
Yeah.
Just more specificity.
it would be,
You can see that labeled on the FEMA map instead of just A zone, it says AE.
right. And I believe the most recent layer for their GIS program is 2022 for the coastal A's. Remember, we actually pulled that up in the last hearing for one of those projects. I forget what, you had asked the question. It was down on Wilson's Grove.
yeah,
Right.
right.
And there's nothing newer than 22 on that, which, as time goes on, is going to be an issue, because as sea level comes up, we're going to have more and more migration of that zone inland.
Yeah.
Okay, we can add those. Previously altered area resilience, there were no comments there. So are we all set then with definitions? We're good?
Yep.
Perfect. Performance standards. There were no issues with the first one, and I don't recall any, I know, Sarah, did you, or Steve, did you have comments on those that were sent to legal for the first performance standard? I don't think there were.
No, not
I
number
didn't.
one.
No? Okay.
Not the first one.
So let's,
Second one,
yeah, let's move down to the second one.
Yeah, I have issues with the second one.
Okay, so, the building code standards, where it says consistent with building code standards, Steve had brought this to our attention quite some time ago, that they were going to move to the 10th edition, and the building code standards have moved to the 10th. There's an overlap up until
June.
June of '25.
Yeah.
But once we get to June of '25, everything has to adhere to the 10th edition.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I had sent a comment in on that for the 10th
Yeah,
edition.
but if, the word consistent with current building code standards, that's perfect. But,
Yeah, I think without referencing it, because they are subject to change, you could just say current, and it reflects the most current version.
Right.
So to get more specific than that, might not even be
Yeah.
necessary.
yeah, I don't think you need to do that.
Right.
The only question I have is the next two words, "and generally limited to the existing building footprint." Well, the word generally, that's just like open-ended, it's,
Right.
So you're saying that you can't add on to it anything, so,
Well, I had suggested the word generally because if it was absent of that and it said limited to the existing building footprint, that's even more restrictive.
Right.
So that's why I added in generally, is to kind of reflect that it's your discretion and deliberation to decide if something
Yeah.
is excessive or not. I don't know how else to word it, I'm open to suggestions, but that was the intent of using that word generally, so that you're not saying you are truly limited to the existing footprint.
Right.
We're talking about the minimum wave action zone, not the velocity zone or the coastal A. So there should be more, I would believe there would be more leniency or, consideration of increased footprint. So that's why I put the word generally in there.
Right, but why do we even need to put that in there? Because if somebody has a 2-acre parcel, whatever, and they have tons of room to build a larger house and meet all zoning requirements, you know, now we're, as a commission, we're limiting somebody that can't build, even though zoning says you can't build. It's like setting up a class of 2 boards and you're limited.
But also,
Because we're charged with protecting the resource area,
Right.
whereas the zoning code is not.
It's a different standard of evaluation. You're looking at it from flood zone resiliency and flood water alteration and flood storage capacity, so you don't have the same criteria as the building and zoning and the way they look at it, so, you know, I mean, I'm open to suggestions as far as, you know.
In the CZM manual, they actually, I can't find it again, but I will. They had a little paragraph that said that you can go beyond what the building code says if you're protecting a resource area. So,
You know,
Yeah.
my thought on it, Steve, is I would use that word generally to make up the difference for a home that was going to be renovated to become flood zone compliant, to allow up to 100, 150 square feet for all the utilities that now have to be located up above flood level, so that it's not reducing their already legally permitted footprint. In other words, they're going to end up short what they had before they even started, because now all the utilities have to go up there too. So if somebody came in and they were proposing 1,000 square feet, I would not call that generally. I would go with enough square footage to meet the requirement for those utilities, and that's it. And again, they can always ask for waivers, whatever the situation may be. It's hard to envision every situation that's going to be out there as we write these
Right, I'm
regs.
just wondering if we
Yeah.
could say, you know, expansion beyond the existing footprint to be determined on a case-by-case basis to meet the requirements of the performance standards of the regulation. You know, because somebody say, oh geez, you know, I want
Mm-hmm.
150 square feet for utilities, you know, I need an extra, you know, 300 square feet, so,
Right.
you know, and, you know, I'm not saying that everybody is gonna tear down the house or rebuild it and do a McMansion, but I just feel like you're just limiting somebody's property rights. But if they say, I'm gonna reconstruct the house and take a non-flood resistant house and make it flood resistant on pilings or whatever, like down in Wilson's Grove, okay, they expanded the house, but it's all flood zone compliant. We're not limiting somebody's property rights. I just don't want to get into the property right issue with people.
Right.
And, you know, lawsuits saying, oh, the town of Mashpee says I can't.
Why don't you
Expand my
write it
house,
like
yeah.
that? So if you wrote it this way, if you wrote it with, consistent with current building code standards and limited to the existing building footprint, period, and then says unless, I think we have it somewhere that you can demonstrate a significant benefit to the resource area.
Okay.
Or a waiver will be granted if there's demonstrated improvement to the resource.
Because in some cases where there has been, you know, proposed expansion of an existing structure and a raise and replace, it triggers mitigation, so you get something in return for allowing something that's reasonable, I guess.
Right.
Because you don't get that if you're restricting it to just the existing footprint, because there's no additional impact. You're replacing the footprint with the same footprint, so where's the impact? So mitigation is only triggered when impact is, you know, when there is some kind of impact in a proposal. So that is something to consider. But it really comes down to what the commission feels is reasonable as far as expansion and what is excessive. And that's kind of a gray area, because you don't really, there's no hard number, there's no hard square
Right.
footage. It's just kind of
Right.
that feeling and, you know, based on the lot size and setbacks to other resource areas and those sorts of criteria that you would take into consideration for any given, you know, increase in footprint. But it is something that you get in return for allowing, you know, expansion.
Well, I'd go for what Shauna just mentioned. I think that gives the commission an out, saying, okay, well, these smaller properties, you don't have enough room to do mitigation or show what, proper thing, so, yeah, you limit the footprint, but if you can demonstrate a gain for the resource area, mitigation and so forth, then, you can grant a waiver for that. And then it kind of gives the commission an out on projects. If they, if the applicant comes in with,
Right.
something that's way better, I'll be funny, more better,
Yeah.
and then, what's there now, so.
Okay. I guess we'll
Does everybody think about that?
take a stab at that when we go back to subcommittee, right? Do you have
Paul, I just want to mention too, I had comments on this. I think this is the one everybody's, probably got some pretty strong feelings about. But I do think with the information that we've seen as a commission and, even what's happening in other parts of the country and really critical coastal communities in floodplains that are really susceptible to flooding and increased flooding. What we do see is that these regulations are restrictive by nature, and I think that is our purview and that is our right. And I'm not going to argue property rights with anybody here. That's not my job, thank goodness. But I will say that we do have a responsibility, and I do think that we do have the authority to say within the floodplain, no more development. And I think a lot of other people are saying that as well. So, and I think that's what we started with, based on what we saw, in other resources like the model bylaw from the Cape Cod Commission and recommendations for what we need to do right now in response to the current condition of the resource and the projected impacts to the resource areas from what we're seeing. And so the revisions to this, it just seems like a really carefully worded clause to make sure that we can continue to develop and overdevelop the floodplain, and it really seems to contradict the recommendations and the presumptions that are set forth thus far in the regulations. So I would actually recommend that we simplify it for consistency and to ensure that protections are retained. And I do think that being restrictive, erring on the side of being more restrictive, would not only be appropriate, I think it would be preferred from my opinion. And I also do want to point out that, the new revisions to the Wetlands Protection Act on a state level are going to include performance standards in land subject to coastal storm flowage. We don't know what those are going to be.
Right.
But my sense is that they're going to address this issue based on everything that I've heard. I don't know about everybody else, but I did have some comments to simplify and make sure that we are ensuring the protections and take out that word generally and just say that we're limited to the existing building footprint. That's what we had before. And then with an additional set % increase, as Paul was mentioning, either or both to be considered by the commission on a case-by-case basis. And then, no new impervious surfaces. And we're not adding home additions, garages, pools, hardscaping, sheds, and fences prohibited. I think us taking a stand in order to protect the resources required, given what we're seeing in the condition of the resource and what we're looking at in the projections to the data. So taking aside property rights, taking aside all the other conversations, taking aside what we're thinking, I do think we can take some solace to know that other areas, other municipalities in the Commonwealth, other communities, and other states are taking a stand as well. So, and this is just another thing I do think that we're going to discuss a little more later, I believe, but the issue of the increases in the interior square footage, I do think is significant for us to consider as it increases the energy and the emissions to maintain that structure. I just discovered today that in 2020, there was a town article unanimously approved by the select board to move the town of Mashpee towards a net zero emissions goal. And this is part of it. This is what we're talking about. So I think all of these things are tied in together, and I do think we have an opportunity to address them here and in other places within the regulatory structure. So those are just my comments, and all of those
Okay.
were in the document that I submitted to you all before. So.
All right. We'll definitely go back and look at that.
Can I
Yes, go ahead.
comment just in response? One of the concerns that we discussed in the bylaw review subcommittee was that when you have language that outright prohibits things like sheds and fences and other appurtenances to the home without giving the opportunity to review and due process, I think you could run into some serious legal issues there. So it's really, you're not giving up protections, you're not softening anything, you're really just saying, we'll review it and we'll see, where it lands. But you can't, I don't recommend outright prohibiting something without due process and allowing an applicant to at least present it so you can deliberate on it. Because how are you going to justify something without even seeing it or hearing it?
Yeah.
Well, I respect that, Drew, but all due respect, I do think that that would be for town council to provide guidance on, again, what's legal, what's enforceable. And again, this is not a town-wide restriction on appurtenances and impervious surfaces. This is in very critical resource areas that need these protections because they haven't been afforded them, and it's dire straits. So I think that, if there are homeowners or residents that have property within these critical resource areas, there has to be an understanding that there are restrictions on what it means to live on top of these critical resource areas. It's not like living in other places in town or other places. And there are other communities that are making these restrictions. So I do understand that it's going to cause some strife for folks, but I think that it's warranted, in my opinion. So, and I would defer to legal counsel on what they would say to how we could approach making those restrictions. And I'd love to hear from some of the other commissioners too, just with their experience with this in particular.
Sure. Somebody else that wants to,
So, Drew, I agree with you. You say prohibited in a reg or a set of rules. That means never, 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 no exception. Restricted is the way to go, because you can put the caveats of what you have to do to get the restricted. So you,
Yeah, the biggest concern I have is not allowing due process. For them to come forward and at least present, because you got nothing to lose with that. It doesn't set any precedent or anything like that. It just says, we'll hear you out, and then we'll make a decision based on what it is you're proposing. But if you don't even allow that to happen by prohibiting something outright, you're going to have to ultimately, and I don't even think we need legal counsel for this, you're going to need justification under your purview to explain why you are prohibiting these things without even having the opportunity to review them.
so there was
I don't
also,
think you need legal counsel to explain that.
I think there's also, I heard two things, Sarah, is there is, a lot's never been developed before, right? And we want to say no development in the coastal floodplain, right? Maybe that's something we can do. And then, because I read mostly too, is changes to existing structures. I think a lot of it has been developed already. And I didn't hear, I heard two themes from you, Sarah. One is fresh lot, never been touched. Do we want to prohibit development on that? And that's not clear in any of this language.
You're right, it's not even addressed.
It's not addressed at all.
I see it in there.
Where?
I mean, when it says no new structures, that to me would mean if the lot hasn't been developed, it can't be developed. Unless there's a piece of the lot that's out of flood zone. Like arguably the property that we had the other day that was completely in the flood zone, that was a shame that lot is being developed. It's gonna be gone within 100 years. Like these are the conversations we need to be having and need to figure out. And what's scary is that depending on the agent or the whims of the commission, it could facilitate more of the build out of the floodplain for the next 20 years. So like that is what we're charged with right now, is figuring out what are we comfortable with restricting so that it protects the property owners. Like ultimately, I wouldn't want to own a structure and build a $2 million house and then have it be gone in 30 years.
I guess my question is, so when it comes to
Alex,
undeveloped,
I'm not quite, so not to be pedantic, but I don't see, you're talking about 4-2, right? That's the, you say properties that lie within the FEMA map, right? And outside the 170 or other are subject to the following standards. Then we have existing buildings, no alteration to existing vegetation, and so where do we say buildings prohibited?
well, the issue is you've got other departments that deem whether lots can be developed or not, right? Like zoning or building, I believe, are the ultimate authorities on whether or not a lot can be developed. So if you're going to put in language, and I say this with a complete understanding, we're talking about your specific purview here, and it's a developable lot that's been deemed developable by, zoning or building, and you're saying you can't develop it, that could result in a regulatory taking. It most likely will result in a regulatory taking, because if a lot can legally be developed, and you're saying it can't, you're really running afoul of someone's right to develop a lot that has been deemed developable. And ultimately, that
But
comes down to what?
It's deemed developable by other standards. It's not by the standards of protecting the resources and the wetlands.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that's currently the way it is. It's, Concom's are not the authority to determine whether lots are developable or not. It's a different department. And so.
But if a lot is, if they don't have the space on a lot to get away from the resource area, it's not our fault, it's not the resource's fault. So that should, it's not like two wrongs don't make a right.
No, I hear you. I guess it would really just come down to if that were, if that were the decision of the commission on an undeveloped lot, and you felt that developing it would result in an adverse impact beyond negligible, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It would result in lasting impacts, and you render a decision, you just let that stand and see where it gets taken, if it gets appealed or not. It's just one of the things that will come up in an appeal is a claim of a regulatory taking. When someone owns a lot
Right,
that's
and
been
I
totally
think, I think
developed.
this also talks to, later on, we'll get to it, but this council seems as though he's telling us that, well, if by building code, if it meets building code, then it should be able to be built. But the building code is to, build a structure that can withstand certain things, but it's not to protect the resource area. And the last council we had said, we absolutely can be more restrictive than the building code.
Well, that's
So,
easy.
it is two different, people are looking at it under different lenses, so I don't see why we couldn't be more restrictive than other departments.
Well, I think the key word is restrictive rather than prohibited. I think if we stay with what we have and call it a restriction, then an applicant has the right to be heard, a commission has the right to say no, and then, as Drew mentioned, we see where it goes from there. And that way, we can't be accused of a regulatory land take. We're giving due diligence and proper review, and the majority of commissioners feel as though there's an adverse effect to whatever structure we're talking about, whether it's on a previously developed lot or a non-developed lot, doesn't matter. It's still a coastal floodplain. And we would be within our rights to say no if the majority of the commission felt as though it was an adverse impact.
Do you think it would make more sense on that no alteration of existing naturally vegetated areas would be permitted on previously developed lots?
Yeah.
Add that in. So you're not talking about undeveloped lots, that's gonna be your discretion if and when it comes to you.
Right.
Yeah.
But at
Yeah.
least for that one, because that could be construed as undeveloped lots, make the distinction that naturally vegetated areas on previously developed lots. So you make that
Yeah.
distinction, that's what you're talking about with naturally vegetated areas.
Right, yeah, because this whole is about existing property, yeah. No, my only concern is, this is, you're trying to have this paragraph work for everything in town, but if you're on Uncle Percy's Road and you're 4 streets back from the water, but you're still in the flood zone. Well, the only resource area is the flood zone, but as long as you can say, all right, yeah, I'm gonna, build another 150 square feet on because I need to put my HVAC equipment somewhere. But it's not affecting the flood zone because you don't have a, you don't have a BVW near you, you don't have a, any wetlands, you don't have vernal pools. You have none of stuff. All you have is, in a flood event, water could go around as long as the house is designed to meet that flood event. If it's 150 square feet larger or 500 square feet larger, as long as it meets the zoning requirement, it's still not changing the flood capacity, like Drew mentioned. As long as it's properly designed, to handle that. Because there's already a structure, most of, all those structures are not flood zone compliant now.
Right.
In that section of Papaneset. So, okay, now we're gonna raise it, we're gonna put in flood vents, we're gonna, do the cutouts in the floor for water to percolate in, all those good things that
Right.
we've been looking for. So to try to say, this paragraph meets everybody in town, now if you're saying this is down on the beach,
Sure.
on, say, Wilson's Grove, one of those, G Place, one of those, streets, well, yeah, because you're much closer to the ocean, you're gonna get, a lot more water in there than you are at Uncle Percy's 4 streets back.
Right.
So I think we need to just clarify it, like you said, if you want to say restricted to, but, give an applicant an out, saying that, we can, and any expansion can review it on a case-by-case basis for flood zone capacity or, however we want to word it.
I think that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
I think if we are going to give folks an out, I would really feel more comfortable if we did put some sort of stipulation in here that peer review was going to be a requirement for any application that comes in the flood zone. So we make sure that we actually have a subject matter expert in floodplain functioning and coastal geology review the project to ensure that whatever's being proposed is in fact not going to impact the functioning of the floodplain, because that's what we're getting down to. That's what these regulations and performance standards are intended to achieve, is to make sure that the function of the natural resource is protected and preserved as much as possible in what, quite frankly, is an overdeveloped area already, pre-existing non-conforming, right? So I'm concerned about the level of certainty about things that we are not experts in, and if we are going to be leaving all of these gaps that very skilled and well-paid attorneys can come in and argue to ensure that folks can still continue to develop, even though we know best practices and best recommendations would suggest against it. I would like to ensure that we have at least a subject matter expert to speak to this.
Sarah, can you give me an idea of what that would cost the average homeowner to do?
I can't, no, but what I have heard, is that, developing, even getting through Concom with a permit is upwards of $20,000. I don't know. And I do know that there are state resources like CZM that do have coastal geologists that provide services. It doesn't necessarily have to be a private pay, but that's something I don't know enough about to speak about.
I agree. I just don't want people like building additions and not coming before us, like just doing it and not pulling permits because they can't afford it and don't want to deal with us. And I don't want to make it cost prohibitive. So I just think we have to think about that a little bit, about what that would really look like.
I agree with you 100%
That's a good point.
with that. And I'll just use like Pompanesett as an area, right? There are people with a lot of money in Pompanesett, and there are people in there that are third generation Pompanesett that are average working Joes.
So the commission has the discretion to require a peer review based on when you review a project, but to require it out front before you get a chance to review it, I don't think that really, that's going to be cost prohibitive. That's placing a burden on the applicant, because how are you going to know it's going to require peer review until you have a chance to review it? So put that in as a condition that peer reviews are required across the board. you don't even know what's being proposed. What if it's a simple landscape change? It's so obvious and so straightforward, and you're gonna require a peer review for it, so, yeah, I don't think that makes I don't think that's necessary. I agree with you.
Sure, understood. Yeah, I mean, I wonder then if it would make more sense just to have peer review for this language. I know we've got legal review. Is it possible to get a coastal geologist to take a look at this?
It is in the bylaw, that 4453G, that allows the commission to have the hiring of an expert, to evaluate the
Yes.
permit application or evaluate plans. So the language already exists in the.
Hang on, wait, Sarah, are you saying that, wondering if we should have, like, a coastal geologist review this?
Yeah,
Do you like actually look at this?
yeah.
That's an interesting idea.
No, it's not.
It is.
Except that's going to take forever, and we need to get this through soon.
Right.
So can I ask a question to that? Why do we need to get it through soon?
Because it's been almost a year, and because this needs to be done. Right now, we've got the old ones, and we're having waivers coming in all the time.
From coastal
Yeah.
geologists. The existing language under Reg 25 was vetted out from several specialists and professionals in the field to come up with that language, and much of that is built into these revisions. So, ultimately, it's your call, but I agree. I think we've come pretty
Yeah.
far at this point to go back and have a coastal geologist review it.
I was just.
Probably more than likely
I
to
wasn't
believe it.
challenging that, Drew. I was
Yeah.
challenging, like, now, does this need to be done?
Well, yeah,
Like, I know you've been working on it for a long time.
well, yeah, because,
and,
2 years in July.
yeah, and the,
But there's a lot of moving pieces going on
Yeah.
Right, but-
now, right? Massachusetts hasn't finished their thing.
right, but
You
that we,
could have to come, but you could have to come and then.
that could be another year, too.
True up that, is there, what have we missed, or what conflicts has the commission had as a result of these performance standards not being in place? Do we believe that these performance standards being in place will make our hearings go faster, get to a yes or no decision quicker?
And some,
Yeah, I believe it will improve efficiency of review. And because you know what's coming down the pike from Mass DEP, I think it behooves the commission to, finish this process sooner than later. And always keep in mind that if you need to go back and make amendments, that opportunity is always there.
Yep, always there.
So,
We should probably
At
be
least,
amending this every
set
6 months.
a ground standard and get some language in place, and, if it's reasonable and acceptable to everyone, of course, everyone, has, input and expansion of language or changes, but to get something in place, at least, in the short term, and then, as you progress down the line and you encounter situations or climate change issues and things like that, you can always go back in and amend it, as many times as you feel, as you see fit. So, I agree. I think it's,
Fair enough. I mean, when we
Yeah.
went from the previous version of this, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 versions back, where it just said nothing outside the existing building footprint. And then the next version came and it was just this very, what feels like confusing and carefully worded thing. Do you, Paul, I'm going to ask you directly, Paul, do you feel that this gives us significantly more protections as written to move forward with? As what was intended with that original simplistic, no building outside the existing footprint?
I think it gives us ample protection. I'm also concerned about a charge of a regulatory land take. I think we need to use the word restrictive rather than prohibited. But when I look at Performance Standard 2, it's head and shoulders above what we have now. And we don't have a lot of time. And I'm not referring to the DEP standards, I'm referring to sea level rise and storms. If you looked at South Cape Beach today at high tide,
yep,
no storm, just look at it at high tide,
it was right
frightening,
up there. Yeah.
absolutely frightening. And I gotta believe that the rest of Mashpee shoreline looked just the same. And it's not a once in a while thing anymore, it's every single full new moon cycle, with or without a storm. We're moving money to replenish beaches, we're losing staircases, the parking lot's buckling, people's yards are washing out. we don't have a lot of time here. We really don't. I can see the difference from when we started Regulation 25 2 years ago and what we're looking at right now. So I wouldn't want to wait another 6 months or a year or wait for DEP. We've been waiting for DEP for over 20 years for regulations for land subject to coastal flow, more than 20. And I fear we could be waiting another 20. I think what we have is a lot better than what we're working with. And I concur with the fact that we can get right back in, and we may have to when the DEP releases theirs, because this can't be any weaker. It's got to be just as strong, and we have the purview of making it stronger to protect our own community. And we really went out of our way since December of 2023, when those draft regs came out, to make sure that we weren't writing a document that was going to be weaker than the potential draft that could have become the regulations, because we only have to go right back in and start all over again. So most of what, as a member of the subcommittee, most of what's here, I'm on board 100% with, but I do want to hear from the other commissioners. This has to be adopted by the commission, not by the subcommittee, by the commission. And then it's got to be, under the magnifying glass of the general public. We still have to go down that road as well. So tonight, for me, is it's a healthy process. I want to hear what everybody has to say. I'm making a lot of notes. Drew's over there banging away on his computer. Sandy's taking notes, and we're going to meet again either March 11th or 10th or one of those days.
Okay.
So yeah, let's just keep the process going. We're only on 2 right now. I'm not trying to shut off the conversation.
we gotta keep moving, yeah, that's fine.
No, let's keep going. That
Okay.
sounds safe.
So I just have, I'm sorry, this, I got really hung up on this. So the second bullet point says no alteration of the existing natural vegetation area. And then we introduced mitigation, 2-to-1 mitigation plantings in the third bullet, which to me seems a little, you're saying no.
Well,
If we were to give it, if we decided, because we're restricting, not prohibiting, if we decided to increase the footprint of a building, as Steve said, they need another 300 feet, because we're going to give them that extra 300 feet, the mitigation would be required on a 2-to-1 basis.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, that makes perfect sense.
That's what we're
we
saying.
also have a lot of properties like in Pompanesett and the Seabury that have a lot of previously altered like landscaping and lawn, right? And a lot of the expansions that we see in raise and replace are going over those types of areas instead of naturally vegetated areas. It's been my observation that anytime the commission sees a raise and replace that's getting into, expanding into what remains of naturally vegetated areas on a given lot, you get more restrictive and justifiably so. You should be restricted to just those areas that are previously altered and not getting into the last few scattered remains of naturally vegetated areas on these lots. Those should be held to the highest standard unless there's an undeniable compelling need to get into that area for like a septic system or something like that. But, in the absence of that, I don't see any harm in saying we should not get into naturally vegetated areas that remain on previously altered lots. But for getting into like lawn areas, or landscaping and replacing that with structure, which triggers mitigation, that's a different animal, so to speak.
I'm cool.
Yep.
Just to explain what
Yeah,
that,
no.
the distinction is there as far as like raising the place. Yeah.
Okay, we're good? We'll move on. There were no comments on 3 or 4 unless you feel as though you have something to add or comment on with those 2. And then we come to number 5. Legal's comment was that this standard, in my opinion, this section is beyond the commission's authority and could be subject to legal challenge. I took the lead on Performance Standard 5. This standard is modeled after a similar standard from the town of Tisbury. That's where I get the numbers 5 minutes per inch and 7 feet separation from groundwater. I see this standard as being no different than when we went and asked to increase the buffer zone. What we were looking to do was we were trying to make more of a separation from our resource areas because of all of the building and construction that was going on around and near them. When you look at most septic proposals that come before us, they either just make the 5-foot clearance, which is required by Title V, or in some cases where they haven't, they're asking for a waiver from the Board of Health. And I've seen some go down to as much as 4 feet. Mindful of the fact that most of the soils that we see, these being proposed, are Carver sands with a perk rate of less than 2 minutes an inch. When an engineer comes in here and says less than 2 minutes an inch, they don't say how much less. Is it a minute and a half? Is it a minute? Is it 30 seconds? So when you think about the length of time it takes the effluent to go from the bottom of that leach field and make contact with the groundwater, in a 5-foot scenario, it's 2 hours. You flush that toilet, within 2 hours, that effluent is in the groundwater, and it's going through sand, which is not a very good filter. It's just crushed rock. Those Title V standards that we look at, that the Board of Health looks at, are for the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They work great once you get off the Cape, but when you're on the Cape, they don't. Go down and look at the water today. We know why we're in the mess that we're in. We have overdeveloped on the backbone of septic systems. And we really, I feel, we need a performance standard to increase the distance from a resource area that we're charged to protect, and that's the groundwater. 5 feet of separation, even with an IA system. You know, we get these nitrogen calculations, and they all look great when you get down to the bottom and it says 7 parts per million or whatever it might be. But I've been asking these engineers almost consistently on every proposal that's been coming down for the last several months. Those nitrogen calculations basically water down what's going on with the septic system. If you look at the septic system, never mind the roofs and the driveways and everything else, just look at that septic system, look at the separation, look at how much nitrogen is coming out of even an IA system. Some of them are up 25. And less than 2 hours, it's in the groundwater.
Alex has a question.
So,
Alex, she raised her hand.
go ahead, Alex, you have a question.
You were on a roll, sorry to cut you off.
Well, sure.
I think, I mean, the Wetlands Protection Act charges us with protecting the groundwater supply. It's like first paragraph. And I think, you know, given that protection of public and private water supply, groundwater supply, maybe if we just have, and there might be, I need to look at this document more, like all the links, I didn't go through them all, but is there a link that just shows about cesspools and septic systems and groundwater? Because that might be enough, because I mean, I think this needs to stay, but maybe we just need to add the supporting citations and whatnot, especially given that if this is inundated, then how is the septic system going to function properly if it's, you know, inundated with salt water? So I think you're right, it needs to stay, but maybe we just need a citation, a big citation.
Citations in terms of?
The effects of saltwater inundation on septic systems, or because this is strictly, I mean, we're putting this because it's in the flood zone and it's super sandy. I don't know. I mean, someone else could maybe have a more creative, what citation.
Well, you have to get your septic in an upgrade scenario, you have to get it out of the groundwater. There's a 3 feet of separation for Title V. Is that
5.
5 feet.
Yeah.
So that's already part of Title V regs, is the 5 feet of separation.
Right, it's just because it's in sandy soil though, and it's like the Title V is designed to get it away from the house. So as Paul was saying, it like really doesn't work on Cape when it gets it away from the house and right into the groundwater supply.
I agree, it should stay. The town council's just giving his opinion that you may run into legal challenges if someone disputes their rights under Title V, and that's your opportunity to explain, well, we're not Title V, we're not the same purview, we're protecting groundwater, and make the case at that time. So we agreed in subcommittee that we don't think that this needs to be removed. But,
Great.
yeah. Yeah, just see how it
Yep.
plays out in any given
Sure.
scenario. One of the things, just if you don't mind, just be saying that,
Yep.
one of the things that this could result in, and most likely would, is that if you're increasing that setback, that distance from groundwater, you may see more raised or mounted septic systems to accomplish this type of separation. So that is, something to consider. It's alteration of topography within the flood zone, that you're gonna have some mounded systems, some which are allowed to have fill and be walled in with retaining walls in some cases, even per zoning allows that. So just something that we discussed in subcommittee, that you may see more of that type of situation, if this language is to remain. I'm not saying you will see it, but it's a possibility.
Sure. And they already have that exception in the floodplain regulation regardless, that, you can bring fill into the floodplain for septic repairs. I would rather see mounds than the constant leaching of effluent into our groundwater. I think it's time that we address this. Anything else on 5? The clerk is telling me to move along. 6, I believe most of 6 is what,
Well, I have a problem with the last paragraph.
go ahead, Steve.
Okay, because I'm looking at the 10th edition right now of the building code, which is going to go into effect in June. And they're saying coastal high hazard areas, which is coastal A and V zones, saying that buildings should be on pilings, but they have an exception. If stem wall foundations supporting a flow system above and backfilled with soil or gravel to the underside of the flow system should be permitted, provided the foundation is designed to account for wave action, debris, erosion, local scour. So this doesn't even match up with the building code, and I think the town attorney says the same thing.
You don't know what number
So if you say, in the coastal A zone that foundations meet the definition, meet the building code compliance, and then you can say vertical walls need to be,
So you want to make a distinction about foundations versus vertical walls? Is that kind of what you're?
yeah, because the foundation is a vertical wall, It's a retaining wall, it's vertical walls, the foundation's a vertical wall, like 425 Monument Square, right? So that, the final result was that front part of the house has a foundation wall because you have all the grade and the soil holding up against it.
Right.
And then the rest of it's on piling, so it handles all the coastal A zone requirements. But, according to the 10th edition, which is gonna start in June, we should, be right in sync with that, saying that, all construction in coastal A zone to meet the requirements of the building code. And then, if you wanna put in, the building code does have an exception, it'd say,
Steve, correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like we've already discussed this evening, but these regulations don't have to match the building code. They have a different regulatory objective.
right, but
Right,
when
so-
you're saying your vertical walls are prohibited, well, that goes against the building code, and there's a legal challenge right there. How can this commission?
Which would be outside of our purview if prohibiting the vertical walls protects the resource area, right? And if legal counsel has indicated that we can't include it there, then, we have to defer to what they have to say. But it's my understanding that we do have
But we
the
had,
opportunity to go against the building code if it protects the resource area.
right, but we had a legal challenge on 425, and the result was there was one vertical wall in the front and the rest were on pilings. And that had to go to court to get resolved.
Understood, but this is about protecting the resource area, not, a particular lawsuit that we were threatened with by a particular homeowner. So I mean, if we're looking at,
Wasn't that
what's gonna
compromise
make
made
this
because of
easy
this language?
and reduce, the legal liability for the town, it's not
Because
my
of the
understanding
building
that that's
code
what
language
we're
in the
doing.
10th.
Yeah, but what
No,
I'm saying is
Sarah,
the
but
case.
I'm gonna challenge you because every legal challenge we have that comes as a result of what this commission does sucks up the time of this commission to resolve the legal challenge, which means we are not focused on the environment too, right? I mean, there's a trade-off of all of our time and energy on getting into, lawyers making lots of money.
So what were you gonna say, Drew?
I was just saying that because of this existing language, in 425 Monomoskoye, the concern was, even though it wasn't required to have the house put up on piles, we were right up against the V-zone, right? That was, made known on multiple occasions during the hearing processes. So because this, vertical walls were, house foundations were considered a form of vertical wall, you were able to make a compelling argument that because of your setback to velocity zone, this house should be put up on piles or have breakaway panels or, a hybrid of that and solid wall foundation because of this existing language. So I don't know if you really want to change it, again, and I agree with Sarah's comment that you're under a different purview, but I don't know if this, a lot of these following comments from legal counsel, a lot of this was in the existing regulation for decades, and we never really came up against any sort of legal dispute. Not to say it wouldn't happen.
Then you leave it in, and you see what
See
the
what-
future brings, and
Right.
address it if
If you
there
see it,
is,
if you see it trending
if there's
towards
a
endless
challenge
legal
and things
disputes,
like
you
that.
can always
So-
go back in and amend it. But it's been in the language for quite some time now, it's nothing new, we just decided to keep it.
But if you look at, right, and I agree,
Okay.
our biggest client is the environment, right? But some of our customers are the citizens of the town that come before us.
Sure.
And in confusing and making it very difficult to get through this process is not a very customer-friendly approach.
I understand.
Sure, but like dominant culture, corporate world doesn't exactly ever protect the resource area. So like, I totally respect and hear what you're saying. It's just not doing something that's right for fear that it's gonna be too cumbersome and take too long and take too much energy, doesn't feel right either.
Well,
But-
so maybe, so this way, the 10th edition says coastal high hazard area, which is a V, and coastal A.
Right.
And it says right in there that elevator has to be on pilings, piers, and so forth.
I'm looking at that right now.
With an exception for foundation walls. So if you said, instead of vertical walls are prohibited, in coastal A, say, all construction in coastal A to meet the building code requirement, then you say other walls may be permitted upon a collection of said walls are properly designed, will not install it. I'm fine with that last sentence,
Right.
just the prohibited bit.
But the 10th edition specifically says for coastal A that it has to be on piles.
Correct, yeah.
So what we're saying is we're prohibiting vertical walls. What's the difference? And
We should
isn't that
just
what we're
say-
saying? We're saying you can't have a foundation wall, vertical wall. It's got to be piles.
Well, then you're talking about retaining walls.
Well, can we say the same
Or
thing that they're
partial,
saying? On
the
piles?
house has to have a partial vertical wall and partial
Right.
pilings, So,
I understand what you're saying with the revisions of the building code, they're gonna be required, so you're not gonna see a solid wall foundation, because
Right.
you can't
Right.
legally establish that in a coastal A zone or in the V zone. So that's already, there's no need to, debate that, that's,
Right.
nobody's gonna be able to do it, you don't have to say it's restricted, or prohibited, because you can't do it, so, I think that, adding in that building code reference makes sense, and then we keep the other language that says,
Yeah.
other walls may be prohibited, based on a case-by-case basis, and if they don't result in
right.
exacerbation of erosion or, things like that, or
Scour,
flood
erosion.
scour, those
Yeah.
sorts of things, that makes sense.
Then it just you know, everybody knows that you gotta follow the building code, and the building code
Right.
specifically tells you what to do.
So
with
we
that
don't
exception.
have, we don't have to define other walls because you can't have a foundation wall on a coastal A.
Well, there's an exception there, says that you can.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an exception. But you have to prove that it doesn't exacerbate the situation.
Before this?
No, scroll down. No, the other way. Right there.
Exception, coastal A stem wall foundations, 20 foot.
Yeah, so that matches, that exception matches up with the last sentence. Yeah.
For other
Yeah,
walls.
So right in sync.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
And, you know, that's all I was saying. See, when you put the word prohibited in, it's like,
No, I always get nervous with prohibited.
right, yeah, and you gotta look at it case by case basis, because each property is different.
Yeah.
You know, so somebody in, you know, coastal A on, say, on, you know, G Place is
Right.
different than somebody at coastal A down in
Right.
Monmouth Square.
Right,
Yeah.
but this is just, yeah, all right.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yeah. The word prohibited just, bothered me.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna strike prohibited, but that won't read right.
No, it could be reworded, I was
We
saying.
have to reword that, okay.
I made some notes up here just to reflect Steve's comments and
Yep.
in reference to the building code, and then strike, you know, the prohibitive language.
Yep.
And then you still keep other vertical walls may be allowed depending on their impacts, how they're constructed. So,
Okay.
Paul, have you ever talked with the Board of Health around your concerns around flowage?
Have I ever talked with
Have we
them?
ever talked to the Board of Health about changing the Board of Health regulations?
I've had a lot of email exchanges with the Board of Health over flow neutral. I've asked on more than one occasion to have meetings of all the regulatory boards to sit down, get us all on the same page in the whole concern of coastal resiliency and protecting the environment, but those meetings haven't come to fruition yet. I'm hoping they will soon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else on 6? There are a lot of comments from town council on 7, and they all appeared to be the same type of comment, you know, kind of circulating around the building code, I believe.
Yeah, we talked
So-
about these zones here, I mean, the DEP's been the same thing.
Level 5.
Right.
Yeah, so 7 is all about velocity zone, right? And town council has the same comments for each one of these standards. But based on the draft from DEP, they are using prohibitive language because you can make the case that there will be adverse impacts if you are in a high velocity zone area of the flood zone. It's inevitable. You can easily make the case that any sort of structures, you know, like it's mentioned here in this draft language, is going to likely result in an adverse impact. You have ammunition there, so to speak, more so than other areas of the flood zone because it's velocity zone. It's
Yeah,
well
right,
known to be
right.
subject to
Yeah.
repeated and devastating damage. So,
I'm fine with that in the
yeah.
velocity
We
zone.
understand.
That makes perfect sense.
Comments, you know, but we talked about that in bylaw review. and
Yeah.
Kind of said, well, this is justified.
Yeah, we were okay with leaving it all the way it is, so.
Yeah.
Anything else with 7? Takes us over to 8. Well, that was the same thing.
Yeah.
Same concerns. And that would take us, 9 was fine, and 10 was okay, unless there's something from commissioners on 9 and 10. And then,
I had a question.
Yes.
Because I was presented with this question from some consultants, engineers, and residents about when it comes to the buffer zone, is the commission of the opinion that all of these very specific standards also apply to the buffer zone? Or is the buffer zone just jurisdictional and you're required to come in if you're doing alterations, case-by-case kind of evaluation?
Yeah.
Because you can't really plug in
That's-
standards for a resource area to the buffer zone when it's not the same, it's not in the resource area. So again,
Right.
I don't know if you could apply these very strict standards to the 150-foot buffer zone to land subject to coastal storm flow, because you're not in land subject to coastal storm flow. All these standards are really predicated on the fact of property location within the flood zone. So I wasn't sure how to answer that question, so that's why I wanted to bring it up for discussion.
Yep.
We agree that the buffer zone is kind of just evaluating and seeing if what's being proposed in the buffer zone is going to have an impact within the flood zone.
That's the way I perceived it,
Yeah,
is that
okay.
it kind of triggers the applicant to come in.
Yeah.
And we had one not that long back, again, cheap place, and all that water that flows down, they're out of the floodplain. But whatever they're doing up there is going to increase the flow of water down into the lots that are in the floodplain.
Yeah.
They're in the buffer zone, so they should be brought in, and they should have to explain what they're doing, and then some standards may apply to them.
Sure.
Depends, like you said, on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
That's the way I read it. Okay? This takes us now down to, and I'm going to lump 11 and 12 together. I sent out to everyone some information, talk about a timely event. Last week, Michael Herman from the Select Board in Orleans appeared before the Assembly delegates, Barnstable County, and he was updating the Assembly on the latest House bills for the town of Orleans, and I believe he said Wellfleet and one other town had joined that petition, are being heard in this session of Congress. It was an eye-opener for me, and it was very educational because the Barnstable County ordinance was mentioned, the House bills were mentioned, and you really got the sense of, we're not in a position as a Conservation Commission to say, you can't put fertilizer down. We're in a position as a Conservation Commission, if we wanted to bring a warrant before the town banning fertilizers, and then we would still not be catching up to where Orleans is, because even if you did that, you still have to go to the state, and it's going to be approved by the state. And they're in that process now. I believe you said there were 6 or 7 other communities. So my hope is that the Barnstable County delegates bring up a new ordinance. The last one expired 2014, I think, or 13, where you could ban fertilizer use within certain amount and distances from a resource area. If a new ordinance could come forward, we'd be all set. We could jump onto that and protect the resource areas better than what we're doing right now. We do have regulations, but it's for a certain amount and a certain time, and those are all found in Regulation 31. So I believe from what I heard a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, that 11 and 12 probably aren't going to fly in this document. They may have to come out, and we may have to look at trying to strengthen a little bit more, if we can, Regulation 31. Unless, somebody wants to have a committee get together and think about drafting a warrant for town meeting. It's too late for this one, but maybe the next one. And I sent those out as well. I sent a packet of all the different files and the steps that Orleans had gone through to get to where they are now. But they've been tied up in the state legislature now for 2 years, maybe 3. They're hopeful this time around that it might come out of committee and get voted on. But I think we might be in over our heads on 11 and 12. Yes?
Town meeting might be the way to go. I mean, if the town really wants it and if people really vote on it, I kind of think it should just be a town-wide ban. I don't think Drew or Dan or anyone has the time and capacity to be driving around and seeing whose grass is too green. And I think if it was a town-wide ban that the whole town supported and got on board with, it would have the most oomph. I don't know, that's just my thought on it.
Yeah.
That town meeting might be the way to get the most support and to actually have it implemented in a meaningful way.
And even if you did do that and you had the support, and those are 2 big ifs, then you would just be in a position to join in with Wellfleet and Orleans and the other communities. I think they said there are about 7 of them so far now that are petitioning the state legislature to approve it. So it still wouldn't be a final, but it would be a step in the right direction. So, we okay with taking 11 and 12 and moving those into 31?
Yeah.
Okay. And 13. 13 is the same language that we already have in Regulation 25. I believe we changed nothing in 13. I think that's word for word right out of the existing Reg 25.
Yes.
14 is language that we brought from another regulation or bylaw, I believe. I don't think that's in 25 now, but it's in a lot of our other regulations,
This actually was taken from our boilerplate order of conditions.
from the order of conditions.
Every order, which makes sense to put in here, just as FYI to the public. So, yeah.
The warning and disclaimer of liability, that was shown to us by the Cape Cod Commission. That was in their higher order standards. Legal counsel feels as though it's not necessary, that we already have,
That out, didn't
Well,
we already have protection
we? Did that before we sent it out.
for that, so we're going to just take that out completely. Okay. And then that takes us over to the resource pages.
Paul, I had a note just on the resource pages.
Sure.
I understand and think it's a really cool nod to have hyperlinks and QR codes, but it's not universally accessible. So I do think that that each resource needs to actually have a full citation, including a URL, in addition to the QR code. Not everybody trusts those or knows how to use them.
So you want the, just a URL
Yeah.
and last date
Yeah.
access on it?
Yeah. I mean, the QR codes are great for folks that are comfortable, with that. But just the web address that people can copy and paste to find these resources would be great. And I don't know if we
Sure.
also have the option to take some, I know we spoke about earlier using one graphic, and I see there's one here down at the bottom, but there's some really other cool graphics, especially in that CZM manual, that we might be able to integrate, whether it's up in the definitions or down in the resources. But graphics tend to be more universally accessible than text also. So just a thought, if we could some images in.
Okay. CZM graphics, add in.
Not changing any of the content, of course, just.
Sure. Okay, we can take a look at that. Anything else? Well, it took a little longer than I thought, but it was good to hear everything that
that's good.
people had for us, because there's no sense
Doing it.
bringing it up for adoption if we have all these glitches. So we'll go back to work. We're good at that. And we're going to meet second week of March. Okay.
Paul, after the next rev, given it's been so long, is it something that we should just say, we're done debating at this point in time and throw it out to the public? I mean, are we getting into the point
Yeah.
of like analysis paralysis?
Yeah, I didn't know, we didn't know what we were going to be dealing with from legal counsel.
I think definitely.
And
heard from legal
I was
counsel.
very happy to get what we got. I knew there was going to be some issues. And we seem to be pretty solid now on what we have here. We'll make the changes that everybody suggested. And I see this as hopefully coming back and being adopted by the commission with all these changes. That's what everybody wants. That's what we'll do. And then once it's adopted, we can move to public hearings. And, let's put this one behind us and move on. We certainly have a lot more to go. So we're close. Of course, I said that back in December, and that's not this December, that was the one before it. So yeah, we'll hopefully get this thing back to you guys at our next meeting. Well, no, it won't be at the 6th, because we're not going to meet until the 10th or the 11th, right? For subcommittee. It'll be the last meeting in March, end of March. Okay. All right, let's move to our next issue, which is Climate Resilience Initiative and Resolution. I know Sarah and Alex have been looking at different things along this concept, and is Alex still with us? I don't know if she is or not, but Sarah's still here. Sarah, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you inform the commission some of the things that you've been looking at and people you've been working with, and kind of fill us in.
And I've stopped screen
Absolutely.
sharing, Sarah, so you can screen share now because I stopped sharing.
Oh.
So.
Great, thank you very much, Drew. And Alex will be right back. She just had to step away for a moment, but I'm glad. Hello, Alex. I'm glad to get started. If everybody wants to take like a 10-second stretch break, that was a long haul on break 25. I don't know.
2 years worth.
Climate. Let's shake it off. All right. Well, thank you for the time on the agenda, the opportunity to present today to fellow commissioners and any community watching or in attendance. As Paul mentioned, I've been working with Commissioner Zolo on an initiative to respond to the urgent needs that our community faces to increase our resilience measures in the face of observed and projected climate change impacts. And today we're glad to bring that initiative to the rest of the commission for discussion and next steps. So I did want to first acknowledge that climate resilience is something that I'm both personally and professionally very intimately connected to and interested in. I acknowledge that's not the case for everyone. It might not be true for everyone here, so I did want to provide just very briefly a little bit of context into some of the information that we all have access to and what it means for our community. And to do that, I wanted to replay 2 very short video clips. I'm going to go ahead and get that queued up. Generally, I'm not very good at talking while I type, so good luck, everyone. Okay, let's see. Oh boy, I think I've got maybe too many windows open, so. Okay, my apologies, guys. It looks like I'm having a little bit of a tech issue, but I'll figure it out. So the first clip that I wanted to play is from a presentation that we heard at one of our quarterly meetings in August of 2024, and that's August 15th, 2024. For anyone who wants to view the full presentation, we heard from the Cape Cod Commission, the Director of Natural Resources, Heather McElroy, and one of her colleagues, Michelle White, who I believe is the Special Programs Coordinator. We have some new commissioners, and especially for anyone that might be new to the realm of managing natural resources or interpreting climate science data or projections here on Cape Cod. This was a really helpful and brief review of the observed and projected impacts and threats to coastal communities on Cape Cod due to the climate crisis from experts in the field. It's about 7 minutes, so give me just one moment. Let me see if I can finish your slide. Okay, you all, we're gonna go into Mordor. I'm gonna bring you right back to the Shire. I have to share my whole desktop. I've got about 1 million windows open. I'm so sorry. Bear with me.
It's okay.
We're gonna figure this out.
What was the date, Sandy?
August 15th.
15th, okay.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes, August 15th, 2024.
Got it.
Are you all able to see my screen at all?
Not yet.
No, super. Okay. Oh, I got it. There it is.
There it is. We
You
see
with
it.
me?
We're with you.
Fantastic. Okay, now let's just make sure everybody can hear the sound. So, if, Alex, I see you. Could you give me a thumbs up if the sound comes through?
Slides to sort of set the context here.
Yeah, you're good.
COD has a very large coastline, and it's vulnerable to multiple coastal hazards. And increasingly, sea level rise is going to impact our shoreline. Next. 19% of the region is located in a flood hazard area as designated by FEMA. Next. And that represents, by some measures, $16 billion worth of assessed value within that area. So clearly, there are good reasons to try to reduce the risk to properties, as well as improve protection of natural resources and the ecosystem services that they provide. Next. And I forgot. In addition, 30% of the critical facilities that our towns have identified in their hazard mitigation plans are located within these flood hazard areas. So yet another reason to take action to try to address the risks associated with storm-related flooding. So just a couple slides on what brings us to this point. Climate change is an event that I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about, but just some of the impacts that we're feeling here and that are anticipated here on the Cape. Temperatures are anticipated to rise over the course of the coming century. Current average temperatures are just under 50 degrees Fahrenheit annual. These are annual average temperatures, and they could go up to as much as 58
I told you
degrees.
she
So
could,
up,
it's 2 5-minute
8 degrees
videos.
Fahrenheit over the course of the century. We expect many more severe storms. I think those of us who've been here for a while are observing this already. 28.
Can everybody see the slides advancing and hear the video?
They're not changing.
No,
They're not changing. Oh, but
Is this a
let's see.
replay from the
Yeah.
August meeting?
yeah.
Right.
We've already seen
That
it.
is-
And was
It does sound familiar.
Yeah.
So what, are you all seeing a slide that has an orange bar up across the top? It says temperature?
Ye-
Yes, yes.
Yes?
Yeah,
Okay, I
because-
wonder if I just don't have it in full screen mode? Let me just try it briefly, and if it's not changing, then we'll check this, and I'll just give you the time and date stamps, and you can check
year
for
when we
yourself.
had a whole series of really intense coastal storms that brought some significant damage to our shorelines. And so we're having both winter storms and tropical storms, and those are anticipated to continue to intensify, bringing storm surge and rainfall that will create flooding. And exacerbating those issues is sea level rise. So there's already been sea level rise over the last, as measured over the last 100 years or so. But we anticipate between 1.3 to 3 feet of additional sea level rise by mid-century, so by 2050. And potentially as much as 10 feet by the end of the century if sort of worst case carbon emission scenarios actually play out. Next.
They're changing
I won't
now.
go through all of these.
Did that
More
change?
on-
Yes.
on the
Okay,
device,
great.
But particularly precipitation and inland flooding contributes to our concerns about the coastal flooding. Presently, we can anticipate, really intense storms bringing 1 inch or more of precipitation one day a year. By the end of the century, that could be 2.5 days. I actually think that that's an underestimate based on just current experience. And then other things that we're seeing are marine heat waves. You've likely heard about increasing temperatures in the Gulf of Maine, especially. It's happening worldwide, but the Gulf of Maine has increasing ocean temperatures faster than any other water body, which has impacts on coastal ecosystems. And then we are also, on the other side of that, at risk for drought and wildfire. Next. So how those coastal threats sort of play out. Here we have an image of erosion is a natural process, but increasingly it is having impacts on developed properties. So this is a coastal bank in Bourne, I believe. Next. And this is was a commercial property in Orleans at Nauset Beach. Liam's restaurant was removed due to, I think this was in 2018. Elements of the septic system are now exposed in this image. Next. And then storm surge. These are, again, this is Bourne. We're already feeling flooding in various places around the Cape. Next. And some folks are taking action to try to, not get flooded. So increasingly, property owners are elevating their homes or taking other action to create barriers, which it can be a good solution, but can also really change the character of our communities. Next. And then some images about sea level rise. This is Sissuit Harbor in Dennis, I believe. And this is just sunny day flooding. This is just very high tide. Next. So, and actually one more, Drew, please. It highlights this one strategy on this large list that I wanted to focus on. So a couple of years back, the Cape Cod Commission conducted a climate adaptation planning process. Engaged stakeholders and developed a climate action plan that identified 11 priority strategies, one of which was identifying approaches to managing development in coastal resource areas region-wide, which brings us to this project, but I want to discuss this.
So I'm going to pause it there. The rest of the presentation went on to discuss a model floodplain bylaw that the Cape Cod Commission staff shared with us back in August. And before I stop screen sharing, I do just want to note, I know we can't view it in full screen to get it to work, but of these 11 strategies, I did just want to note that 5 of the 11 strategies proposed as priority actions do involve reducing emissions and energy consumptions. I thought that was significant. And given the tech challenges, and I know it's been a long night already. I did have another clip queued up that I wanted to share, but I think what I'm gonna do is just give you all a description of it, and we can keep going. It was a replay from a presentation that we heard at another quarterly meeting in November, November 7th, 2024, for anyone wanting to see that whole video, from Rebecca Haney, who's a senior coastal geologist with the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, and she spoke to the commission and the community on the function of coastal floodplains and how the decisions that we make as a commission to manage the floodplain impact the floodplain's ability to function as intended to protect coastal communities. And in particular, the management of the floodplain directly relates to how well the floodplain can receive and dissipate energy from flooding events, which we know and we see are increasing as a function of climate change. The timestamp for that November 7th, 2024 video, if you wanted to see that presentation, it starts at about 18 minutes in, and it goes for about 35, 40 minutes. And I do want to note that she does mention the difference between how a developed floodplain and a natural floodplain respond to coastal floodwaters, and how things like solid or impervious surfaces and vegetative cover, along with built elements, can impact the ability of the floodplain to protect against coastal storm damage. So this is some of the baseline that we've already seen as a community and a commission. There's a lot of information out there that I know we reference in terms of manuals, data viewers, and the initiative that we bring before the commission this evening is a draft resolution that identifies priority strategies as informed by available science and experts in Cape Cod climate resilience measures to respond to the climate crisis within the purview of this commission. The process would be to adopt by majority vote the resolution to allow these priorities and concerns to be on the record with both the town boards and departments and with the residents, and hopefully to kickstart the process of a unified and really targeted approach towards achieving a more resilient community. And I know that most of you are probably more familiar with the process of resolutions than I am, but I just wanted to offer a couple gentle reminders about resolutions as a mechanism. A resolution is not a regulatory document, nor is it intended to be enforceable, although it could inform regulatory revisions. And this is a position statement on recommendations within the purview of this commission to respond to climate change, and it would be adopted by a majority vote by the commission to the record. This is one of many strategies that are employed by other municipalities in the Commonwealth to respond to the climate crisis. And I do also want to note that this is a draft document. It's still being modified by the contributing authors, myself and Commissioner Zolo, as we continue to learn about new strategies, what's being deployed in other communities, and as the unique concerns relative to Mashpee continue to unfold through actual projects interfacing with our current legislation. So at this point, I'm going to share the draft resolution with the rest of the commission and the community for discussion and revision. I'm going to read it. It's about a page and a half long. I'm going to share it on my screen so you can see it, and then this document will be emailed out to the commission after the meeting. But just to get it on the public record, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. Okay. Is everybody able to see a bunch of words?
There you go, it's better.
Perfect, perfect. The most recent reports, models, and data outlining the impacts and projections of climate change-related impacts to our coastal community highlight the need for specific measures to maximize our community's resiliency and adapt to increases in coastal storms and flood events, sea level rise, and shifting ecological conditions. Development, alteration, lack of buffer plantings, and excess nutrients from landscaping and septic system overloading weaken the Mashpee ecosystem's ability to thrive and adapt to climate stressors. Protection of the natural functions and characteristics of our coastal features is essential for sustaining the resilience and resources our most vulnerable communities need. The key proposed strategies are as follows: establishing a clearly defined, no-touch, no-growth zone within the existing buffer zones to resource areas and the floodplain. This strategy, which prohibits all new development, is of utmost importance. This includes development, not maintenance, towards new expansions of the built footprint to existing structures, be they non-conforming or in need of repairs, to achieve compliance with existing codes and regulations. All such renovations to existing structures need to only occur within the existing built footprint of the structure, and complete rebuilding of existing structures is to be restricted whenever possible in favor of lower disturbance activities, such as localized renovations, off-site construction, and other novel solutions to protect damage to resource areas. Modest expansions that are vertical rather than horizontal may be considered. However, we must acknowledge the increase in energy needed to maintain a larger structure and its direct impact on the climate-related risks to the region. Increase the base flood elevation to 17 feet based on data modeling from the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management for sea level rise projections for 2070, and require homes to be raised only on piles to reduce the obstructions to flood protection capabilities necessary as we plan for increased storm flowage and coastal floods. Restrict disturbance, alteration, and removal of all vegetation within existing buffer zones to resource areas and the floodplain, be it native, naturally occurring, or long-standing landscaped areas, to reduce erosion and stormwater pollution to waterways as much as possible. Compensatory plantings for mitigation purposes should no longer be granted waivers from existing regulations, and a town-wide ban on all fertilizers should be established in perpetuity to encourage conversion to all native species and protect water quality. We also recommend the establishment of a town-wide restriction that only native plants be able to be planted for landscaping. All land within 75 feet of water resources, including the flood zone, shall be eligible for an incentivization program for increased vegetation and decreased lawn area. We recommend that the town establish a monetary incentive for properties that convert from lawns to diverse native plantings within these areas as well as an incentive program for installation of vegetated buffers for waterfront properties, in acknowledgement of the science-backed recommendations that support this strategy as key in reducing property loss and ecological damage from climate-related storm events. The planting shall be installed per the recommendation by the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Establish a fund to support a town-wide requirement for all non-conforming septic systems and cesspools to be upgraded and/or removed by January 31st, 2026 for all properties that are not within the planned town-wide sewer system install. This could include cost sharing and/or covering all costs to support these activities for eligible residents and incentives for fast action. In addition, it's recommended that the regulated limit for daily nitrogen is reduced from 19 parts per million to 10 parts per million for all systems. It is also recommended that all relevant boards and commissions prohibit variances that would increase septic system capacity or potential load, particularly on properties outside the planned sewer system install. Prohibit any further construction of new docks, piers, or other coastal structures. Restrict maintenance of existing structures to occur within the structure's original footprint, and adhere to all construction methodologies to protect shellfish habitat and reduce erosion or changing the topography to all land underwater. And finally, all relevant Mashpee town bylaws and regulations should be updated and/or reviewed every 5 years to reflect the most current projections for sea level rise. The natural systems within the resource areas of Mashpee can act as barriers against severe weather, reduce the risk of property damage, and prevent displacement by mitigating the impacts of rising sea levels and erosion. By preserving these ecosystems through the strategies outlined above, we support the stability and safety of the communities that depend on them, helping to ensure they have the natural defenses necessary to withstand future environmental challenges. Be it resolved that we, the Conservation Commission in the town of Mashpee, Massachusetts, by majority vote, do hereby recommend to the town of Mashpee and all relevant boards, committees, and residents therein, the strategies above be adopted in response to the projected impacts of climate change on our waterways and wetland resource areas. I know that's a lot. I know we've spoken an awful lot about some of these things in our previous discussion. And at this point, I wanted to pass the floor to Commissioner Zolo for any additional context or comments before we hand things back to the chair and open up for discussion.
I just want to add, this is just a tool to state our stance. I know it comes off as strong. I, encourage you guys all to read it, think about it, offer ideas. But it's really taking a stance and saying where we're really intending to go. It's not an enforceable document. It's more like where we're trying to go. So with that, I would just encourage you all to read it, sit with it, and think about what we should be doing as a commission.
Okay. I guess we're set. All set?
Back to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would like you to email that out so the commissioners do have it. I find it hard to take a lot of notes myself, but I did take some notes on different dates and times. And we can place that on the agenda for discussion at our next meeting, or I believe the next meeting would be sufficient time to be a week, right?
Sure.
Take a look at it, and we can comment on the different aspects that you have here. It's a lot to digest in a single reading.
Agreed. Absolutely. I can have that emailed out to everybody this evening.
Okay. And could you, when you do email that out, could you email the links for the two videos?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, with the timestamps.
Yeah.
Yep. The first clip is about 7 minutes, and the second one is about 3 minutes long. So.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any questions so far? I know you want to take the time to see that, mark it up, and we'll bring it back for discussion.
It's very bold.
There are some nice things in there. Yep. Okay. Drew, you said you wanted to hold on permit eyes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to table that software for another presentation. I skipped over, I'm sorry, ongoing initiatives for freshwater ponds. I know, Shauna, you brought this question forward. I don't know if you're familiar with all the resources that are found on the town's website for all the various ponds. I went through quite a bit of that just so that I would know where everything was. The two sites that I found extremely valuable were the Department of Natural Resources. There's stuff on there about Ashumet, Santuit, Mashpee, Wakeby. I also know that if you go to the Save Mashpee Wakeby Pond Alliance website, they have access to the complete diagnostic study that was just released. I believe Ashumet is going to have alum treatment this spring. There's 2 warrants that are going to go on to the town meeting for May. One of them is to look at alum treatment for Mashpee Wakeby. The other one is to look at the possibility of moving forward on a collective alternative septic system design for the north area of Mashpee Wakeby. A lot of that's being worked on with the town of Sandwich through the intermunicipal agreements. So each of the ponds, they all have similar issues, but they're all a little different from each other. We've been working with the eradication of the milfoil problems in John's Pond, and that's going to happen again this spring, right, Drew? So beyond that, I don't know if there's any specific question.
No,
that
I think it was just, I've seen the ponds come up at town meeting.
Yeah.
I know there seems to be a lot of Save XYZ pond across the town, and I think there seems to be a lot of, good community involvement in stepping up when ponds seem to go sour. As well as, I think, at least a lot of also closer to home, Dean's Pond in Papaneset, that they did all the invasive species remediation 2 years ago and spent a lot of time with that. And I was just wondering our view on should we be looking at trying to coordinate efforts against all these individual ponds, and is there a pond in town that might not be getting the attention it deserves that we need to try to step up and think more critically about?
There is a newly formed freshwater ponds committee, and I believe they're seeking representatives from all of the various pond groups to address that very point that you just made, so that they're all working together. That was actually kicked around in the Environmental Oversight Committee for a while, and I know it was just approved at the Select Board 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 now.
Because you've got like these various friends groups, and then you've got but they're not working together as one entity, and that's the thought process, bring them all together as one committee to look after all of Mashpee's freshwater bodies collaboratively instead of separate.
One of the thoughts I had, and I didn't hear any mention of it, was to have like a liaison from some of the different boards that would sit on that committee, such as, I represent us at the Environmental Oversight. Sandy represents the commission at the CPC. And, maybe that's a thought, that we could have somebody from this committee look into that possibility. Might be interested in that. Yeah.
Ponds.
Yeah.
Sure, love to do.
I know they're trying to get representatives for each of the ponds, but it might not be a bad idea to have somebody from Conservation, the commissioner, to sit in on those meetings as well. If you're interested in that.
Question
Sure.
on milfoil. Is there any cohesive effort with the state? Like Maine has a real aggressive milfoil program where there's, you bring your boat to Maine, you got to get a sticker, there's people checking at the boat ramps that inspect your boats. Does the state have any plans to
They typically.
get a cohesive program together similar to that?
Not that I'm aware of, they typically defer to the towns, even like the management of the state openers are managed by
Right.
town personnel.
Yep.
So the state kind of takes a backseat, not very proactive role, to be honest. But I've been having this conversation lately with various residents around the pond, and we're concerned about, repeated.
That's concerning,
infestation
yeah.
of invasives. And it's definitely something that I think the conversation needs to be had with town authorities, select board, town manager, about, providing funding for staff to be at these landings during the season and inspect boats before they hit the water bottom, even kayaks and canoes, because they can transport just as easily.
Sure.
And I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor to pursue, and something that I think is urgent, because all you're gonna see is just these ongoing treatments, whenever an infestation reoccurs. And so it really needs to be ramped up in terms of enforcement and monitoring. So I'd sign on board with that.
Right.
Maybe a letter of recommendation from the Conservation Commission or something like that to go to the select.
To
board.
look into that possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might not be a bad
So
idea.
Paul,
Yes.
you as our chair will let them know that I'll start to attend those meetings? Is that how the process works?
I can contact them as chair and ask if they're interested in
Okay.
having a liaison from the commission represented on the committee.
Okay,
Want me to do that?
yeah.
Sure.
I'd be happy to do it, I just don't,
Okay.
I want to go through proper channels.
Yep. Let me just make myself a note.
It's surprising how much fresh water is in this town when you start to think about it.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to move down to Regulation 3A6 and plan requirements and Regulation 24. I know over the past several months, there's been a lot of discussion about plans. What kind of plans should we be looking at as opposed to what zoning's looking at, or planning board, or building department, or board of health, or whatever agency. We just started taking Regulation 3 apart in terms of different components of 3. Some of them, we think, as a subcommittee, belong more in Regulation 1 than in 3, but we're just at the very early stages. In the meantime, I think it behooves the commission to look very carefully at all of the files that get sent out. We tend to get these a week and a half ahead of time. And if you see a project that all of a sudden, there's no plan here, I think we should be in touch as quickly as possible with either Drew or Dan and say, listen, there's a supplemental plan that we would like to see. And I know that can't be caught on every single project, but when we come to the meeting, I think if there's a plan that you didn't see that you want to see, we should bring that up immediately and, get that out right away to the applicant that we don't have enough information on the desk to make a decision. I personally think that every single plan that a project has, wherever it's going to show up, whether it's planning, zoning, building, board of health here, we should all be looking at the same stuff. Because to see one set of plans here and a different set somebody else sees, it's just apples and oranges is what it is. But there's a lot that we need to do in subcommittee as far as working with Regulation 3 to kind of sort that whole thing out and make better sense of it. But I know, Steve, you brought up construction methodologies on a project at our last hearing, and that is specifically outlined in Regulation 24. So as a commissioner, if you see a project and you're kind of scratching your head saying, how in the world can this possibly be done? We have the right to ask for construction methodologies according to our regulations. It's right in 24. So you should take a look at that because it does talk about all the different plan requirements that, and again, there are additional requirements, and anytime a commissioner wants that doesn't feel comfortable knowing that they're protecting the resource area based on the plan that's given, ask for supplemental plans. And if that floats by as a majority of the commission, then we'll get them. At least that's the way I would interpret that.
What I've done too, because I've observed, the commission wanting to see a lot of, building plans for projects, particularly in the flood zone. So I sent out notice I have a email distribution list of all the consultants and engineers that we commonly deal with. Maybe not absolutely all of them, but most of them. Letting them know that it's, you know, going to be probably something, or it is going to be something the commission wants to see when it comes to raise and replace or home additions for projects in the flood zone. So currently right now, under somewhere buried in Regulation 3, it says you have the discretion to require it, but it's not a baseline plan requirement. But based on what I've seen and what you've been asking for, you know, over the last, you know, couple of years, particularly for projects in the flood zone, I just felt it was good to let applicants know so that they can furnish that information and we don't have to ask for it and then get a continuance and things like that. So
Yeah, good.
hopefully you'll start seeing that more regularly moving forward.
Yeah.
And we can make it a requirement when we look at it through the bylaws.
For Regulation 3.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful because some, I think, not in every case, but especially in a flood zone, it just, way they're gonna build something, whatever, it's gonna impact the flood zone, it's gonna impact the resource area, and not thinking
Sure.
100% through and say, well, okay, you know, case in point, the one that, you know, last hearing,
Yep.
down in Wilson's Grove, it's like, all right, so how are you gonna keep that from eroding? We already had twice down on, what's the place down by back end of Willowbend on Shoestring Bay?
Signs, narrows and.
Yeah, it's like, I've driven down there twice, and they, after a heavy rainstorm, there goes the dirt driveway all the way running down into the
Sure.
resource area.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, so, you know, just people, a lot of these contractors, I just see it from my years in the business, is they do something and they don't, you know, the guy that's a GC, he might pay attention to it, but the excavator isn't. So there's, you know, problems. So if you look at a building plan and say, oh yeah, there could be a problem, or no, it rules it out. Maybe, yeah, okay, that's a great plan, and you're good to go.
Yeah,
You know, rule it in, rule it out type of thing.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, so, yeah, that makes sense. That's good.
Okay, so we'll spend a lot of time in Regulation 3, I'm sure, and we'll come up with some required different language for plans that should be turned in. Mechanisms to shorten meetings and reduce amount of time with hearings. I'm at a loss for that
What do we do
one.
with that?
I'm at a loss for that one. You know, we try our best, but I think you come into a meeting at the very beginning and you've got 8, 9, 10 hearings, even at 15 minutes apiece, there's 2.5 hours right there, and then you get all the time in between, and so it's the nature of the beast. We are swamped, and we tend to be swamped almost every meeting. And I know we have a waiver that most applicants sign. I believe they all sign it. I'm not sure that
Well,
every
they're
single.
not required to sign it, but it is an
Right.
option if they want to waive the 21-day scheduling of a hearing from when the application gets submitted. We did run this by
Right.
council to see if we could actually limit the number of hearings or applications received, but he pretty much said in so many words that you really can't do that. You're bound by the 21-day statute whenever an application is either emailed or dropped off in person or snail mail, whatever the case is, that's considered received when we actually receive it. So we are bound by that 21-day statute, but if the applicant is willing, they're not required to, sign a waiver of that 21-day submittal, then we can postpone that hearing to a different hearing date outside the 21 days. But it's at the applicant's discretion.
Sure.
So,
And I believe the
We made
waivers,
some good strides where we've reorganized, we put the RDAs first, or the
Yeah.
COC.
yeah,
you
moving
know,
the agenda around a little bit.
Continuations and, you know, and then the NOIs, I think, okay, that kind of speeded it up for,
Yeah.
I noticed that, so that's helped, yeah.
And we have our, you know, slow and busy times. Lately, it's been busy, but every once in a while, it'll slow down. I remember a few hearings where we only had 4 or 5. It was kind of a vacation.
Yeah. And I think just offer a suggestion when it comes to, like, you know, the presenters, just holding them to that time limit. You know, because sometimes you see them kind of repeat themselves and
Right,
go
yeah.
in circles, and just being mindful of that to say, hey, look, we heard all this before, you just re-emphasizing your point. Maybe just
Yeah, shut them
try to
off.
prevent
Yeah,
that more, cut down on some time.
yeah. I thought.
Well, I did have a couple of thoughts to share just on this one, and then I'm so
Sure.
sorry. I think after this line item, I'm gonna have to excuse myself. My kids are losing it in the background. But I think I had even sent this one in. This might have been one of the ones that I had sent in, but it's just been my observation that a lot of time is spent and wasted trying to get information from applicants that should be included in the original application submission. I know we just talked about this a little bit with Regulation 3, but I'm also really concerned about the practice of scheduling a public hearing for applications that don't yet have critical components, things like a DEP file number, or proof that the application has also been filed with all the other relevant boards and commissions in town as required by the bylaws. We also see a lot of applications coming before us without official documentation for things like control of land, accurate nitrogen calculations, response letters for filings with Natural Heritage and Division of Marine Fisheries. And when these do come in, oftentimes I've seen they're sent to us just a couple of hours before the hearing, which doesn't give us adequate time to review prior to the hearing itself. And I believe that requirement we have in place for the application materials submission timeline prior to an upcoming hearing is actually there to allow this volunteer board adequate time to review the materials and be reasonably prepared for these permit hearings. And then there are other elements that I think like we as a commission can consider in terms of what we want to see to ensure a smooth, streamlined hearing process that reduces the amount of time that we find needing to spend on each application. Stuff like what we just talked about, architectural plans, construction designs, anything that might be included in like a plan review or a design review for other boards or departments. Information on increases to living space. I continue to advocate that this is within our purview and our responsibility to consider, as it has really big implications for the energy use and emissions we're approving in areas that are already significantly compromised by the impacts of climate change, as well as being in line with the town article on net zero emissions that was approved unanimously back in October 2020. I just discovered that today. But I don't think we should be directing the staff to schedule a public hearing until all of the pieces are in hand and able to be remitted to the commissioners for review prior to a public hearing. And I also don't feel comfortable conditioning permits on the basis that these required application materials are going to be submitted and reviewed by the staff after the public hearing has concluded, and there's not another opportunity for either the commission or the public to see those submitted documents. So I think this is a little backwards. I think we need all the information before we issue the permit, and I think we need all the info before we schedule the hearing. And I also have noted that waiver has been present in a lot of the applications. I understand it's not required, but a lot of applicants do sign it, and that does waive the requirement for us, right, to hold that public hearing within 21 days of receipt of that completed application. But I don't feel that we utilize this in ways that allow the meetings to be more streamlined or manageable for us or for the public. And I fear that without some sort of definitive action to address these issues, the service on this commission is going to remain unsustainable for a lot of residents, and it's going to limit the voices that are going to be at the table. The local expertise that we can draw upon is going to be limited, and the quality of the service of the commission that we're able to provide in exercising our duty to uphold these protections for the wetland resource areas in a time where this is so critical is just going to be compromised. We're brain dead by the end of these 4-hour meetings. And so I'll yield here, but I do think we need to set a standard for what constitutes a complete application and not start that clock to receive applications until they are complete. And I do think that we have an opportunity to limit the number of hearings we schedule per meeting utilizing that application waiver to ensure that the meetings don't exceed 2 hours in length and that they can offer some time for additional topics. So we're not trying to cram everything into these quarterly meetings. We as a commission, we have a lot of roles. It's not just permit issuance. And to reserve everything else for these quarterly meetings is just really slow, and I haven't seen it to be a really efficient way to move these things forward. So I do understand that the meetings, that there's just not currently space for anything else the way things are. So I would like to encourage us to make some changes and make some more space for a sustainable service for all of us as volunteers. So that's all I have to say. I'll hand it back to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we need another subcommittee on efficiency or something. Might not be a bad idea. That kind of leads me into the next topic that we have here, supplemental forms for the filing packet and the NOI checklist. Perhaps the NOI checklist we could take a look at and maybe update that a little bit more to get around the plan issues, the NCALC issues, I did notice on that form, we don't have a box for making sure that the Board of Health has been filed with. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and that kind of has held up a few projects. I have a feeling that we could solve some of these issues by maybe looking at that checklist. I think is it Form 2? It might be
Landscape
Form.
design's also something that we seem to, come back to, wanting a lot, or at least since I've been there, that seems to be something.
Say that again, the what?
The
Landscape.
landscape design
design,
plan. So
yeah.
I've noticed that when people have a landscape design plan, everybody gets a little comfortable faster when they
Right.
don't know what that is.
Filing with the ZBA, but that is on the checklist, I believe.
It's on the checklist. We can add Board of Health to that and, take a look at the checklist overall, just to make sure it's, as comprehensive as possible. I do just want to say that, in terms of staff and processing permits, that if we see a permit that's seriously deficient in information and has like no plans or, insufficient information, we don't allow it on an agenda. We inform the applicant, you've got to go back and revise. But most of the applications you receive, to be perfectly honest, meet most of the requirements, if not all of them. There's always going to be deliberation and requested information above and beyond what's listed in the regulations or on a checklist. That's just the nature of the beast. So, I find it a little kind of offensive to say that, I'm not casting any kind of blame here. It's just when I hear that, staff isn't like vetting, or it sounds like we're not vetting the permits and we're just shoving them on an agenda. We're not. We take a lot of time and effort to vet these permits, and we feel that when they get on an agenda, they are mostly, if not 100% complete, but they are still subject to additional information, and that's just the way it goes. So, I don't really take that comment too well, because we spend an enormous amount of time and effort to make sure the permits are processed and complete to the greatest degree possible. But
I have
having said
no
that,
doubt
I'm
that
happy
that's
to-
true too, and I wonder if we can just find a way to standardize that to make it more efficient, because my observation, my experience has been very different. The applications don't include necessary materials. We had an application a couple weeks ago that came in twice, initially, and then for a continuance that still didn't have a control of land document for us to see. These are critical things, and so maybe it's just a factor of putting a list together and really coming together on the process so that your time is not, wasted and it's appreciated and we're getting the information we need. But this is a dynamic that I absolutely will stand behind as being my observation and experience. No offense to the tremendous work that you all do. Is there a way for us to make it better so we can shorten these meetings and not spend an hour talking about an application and asking questions and trying to get information that we should have had access to before it was scheduled?
Well, I think in going into that NOI checklist, that should be step number one, and we'll kill 2 or 3 of them right there, and we can work on the others. I think, whatever is causing us the extra amount of time with the hearings, if we can avoid those, great. Some of them are unavoidable. You're going to get into deliberations, and all of a sudden something's going to pop up, and we don't have the information for it. It's going to require a continuance. I mean, it's, as he said, it's the nature of the way it goes. But I think you're right. I think a lot of things we can focus in on and hopefully take some of the glitches out.
So I'll volunteer to do something for the next 3 meetings, or however many meetings. I'll document why we had a continuance, because I think that is the other thing that we should be working on. If done right, is it like 1 meeting and done, right?
Right.
And so that at least we can start to maybe create our data set that says, why do we have continuances?
Sure.
Because that'll allow us to go back to your point, Sarah, and make sure that we're making sure we're getting all the right information in the beginning, and maybe it is people watch, that. So I don't think we have a clear understanding of why. Well, maybe we do, but, so.
Yeah, and information varies from project to project, because they're not all
Yeah.
the same.
And maybe we'll
So-
come up at the end, it is just the nature of the beast,
Right.
or maybe
Right.
we can catch some bluebirds that say, if we make this little tweak, we can do better.
Yep,
Yeah, it's a good
Great.
idea.
yep, willing to try anything. Okay. The next topic was the bylaw review subcommittee. We do have an open position on that. I know, Steve, you had mentioned to me a level of interest. I know Sarah has submitted a letter of interest, and I don't know if anyone else knew that. Alex has stepped off the committee, and we can have 3. That gives us a non-quorum group, so that we don't have to go to public notice and have the public in. That's really no way to write policy. So I'd like to get that slot filled. I think it would be helpful. So if nobody else is interested, I'd like to bring that up maybe at our next meeting and see if we can't.
I do have a comment on that.
Sure.
My recommendation would be that we add Dan Kent, the assistant agent, as the 4th member. And that way you would have equal representation of staff and commissioners. And I think that just makes sense. Not that I think we've worked great with the 3 of us, but I think, that way you would have an equal staff to commissioner ratio. In reviewing, that's just my input, my suggestion.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I'm going to give this some thought, and I'll put it on our next agenda. Anything else on that? Okay. Update on the Cape and Islands engineering signage. I know I originally brought this up quite a while ago, and they said they were going to deal with that, and they hadn't. I know, Steve, you mentioned it at one of the meetings. And I see, Drew, you're still waiting a response from them. It's very misleading for a professional company to have the words Conservation Commission on the sign. It's like we're a partner or something of them. The regulations call for a plain sign, and it even gives the dimensions, 18 by 23 minimum, light colored background, dark letters, DEP file number, that's it. So they, for whatever reason, have taken the opportunity of using their signs, their logo, they put our name on it. It's just very misleading. So I had asked quite some time ago, probably a year
over
ago.
a year ago, probably.
Yeah,
Over a
we
year
brought it
ago.
to
Yeah, we
attention
brought-
back then, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it just kind of slipped off the radar. I don't know if I had noticed that they made the change or not
Yeah.
since that time.
It's still
I will
not-
say that I don't know, as far as like legally, and we can certainly, ask town council about this if there's any kind of, disagreement between Cape and Islands and the commission on their feelings about use of the word or phrase Conservation Commission. If there's any legal, precedent there or
Right.
ability, legally speaking, for the commission to say you can't put that on a sign to a private company. I don't know if it's trademarked. Conservation Commission is a generic term. It's, if it says Mashpee Conservation Commission, we may have more of a, point. But having said that, we can certainly go to legal counsel if necessary,
Yeah.
to clarify that. But it's just something that occurs to me. I don't know if there's any legal authority to really require a private company to change their sign.
I just wonder what's their reasoning?
I think it's really, in my own opinion, I think it's really just for absolute transparency. This sign is being put here, it says Conservation Commission, because it's within wetlands jurisdiction, and they want public transparency to know this is the purpose of the sign. Not everybody knows what DEP stands for. Not everybody's gonna know what that sign in place, if it doesn't say Conservation Commission or wetlands jurisdiction or something like that, what is the point of it? How is it going to inform the public unless they see clarifying language to understand what the sign is there for? So I don't think it's really, I think it's a no harm, no foul situation in my own personal opinion, but, we're following up regardless, so.
Okay, great. Just moving along quickly. On the updates, do you want to just go with the comments that all the commissioners have for the sake of time? I know that was one of our discussions.
Sure. That's fine. There's just one thing I wanted to
Sure.
highlight, and it is in bold in the second bullet point for upper quadrant restoration. So the original approach was going to have a public scoping meeting here during one of our meetings, but we know that's going to add a significant amount of time.
Right.
So APCC and Webner, the Quay Bay Research Reserve, are working together and going to host a public scoping educational outreach event at the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Government Center on April 5th from 9 a.m. to noon. We'll have booths set up. Myself, Dan, and many other folks will be there. Horsey Witten Group, DPW Catherine Lorenz, to sit at these tables that are going to be, identified for each project. Red Brook for the possible wetland restoration aspect of Red Brook, which we're very much just in a conceptual stage right now. The culvert replacement is moving forward, but and then the upper Quashnet and then the upper Mashpee River, so we can gauge public, scoping and, input to these projects, and that will help to inform, conceptual design approach moving forward. So
Right.
it's good to have it in a separate venue, a larger venue, and
Right.
Weber's handling all the advertising, outreach, so we're expecting hopefully a good crowd.
So this was originally going to be at Webner, right? But now we're
Well, it was
going...
originally going to be at one of our meetings
Okay.
for Upper Question. But I
Okay.
decided it was a better venue and a better way to do it at this venue.
Great. Okay, terrific.
Just a
would-
quick question.
Yes.
On that harbor management committee,
Yes.
is there a draft that we could look at? I was trying to find it online, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't think it's been put out there yet, but I'll get it out to the commissioners so you can all see it.
Yeah, just be curious, just to read it. I know they're going up for, final draft and,
Yep. Yeah, it's close to that stage now, and I know there were like surveys that were done to kind of inform this, this document. But yeah, I'll send you all out the draft.
yeah, be curious just to read what they're talking about.
It's good, it's the only time the town hasn't had a harbor management plan in decades. I think the last one was very complicated, we got to the stage where it was finalized and then left dead in the water, no pun intended.
I'd accept the motion
So moved.
to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
Thank you, Sandy. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote. Steve?
Yes.
Sandy?
Yes.
Shawna?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well.